Dr. Lucas Greaves walked slowly through the dense jungle, his boots sinking slightly into the soft ground with each step. The air was thick with humidity, and the sounds of unknown creatures echoed around him. He had been on this uncharted planet for nearly 3 weeks, conducting research on the unique ecosystem, but there was still much to learn. Lucas was used to studying alien life forms, but this planet was different. Everything here seemed alive in a way he hadn't encountered before. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and checked the scanner in his hand. The device beeped, indicating he was getting close to a rare plant species he had been tracking. He smiled to himself. This discovery could change everything about how humans viewed this world. As he moved deeper into the jungle, he spotted a strange figure crouched beside a large rock. At first, Lucas thought it might be an animal, but as he got closer, he realized it was a humanoid figure, its features a mixture of reptilian and human-like characteristics. The creature appeared to be watching the ground, its greenish skin blending with the surrounding foliage. Its large, slanted eyes glowed softly in the dim light filtering through the trees. Lucas froze, unsure whether he should approach. He had encountered alien species before, but never one like this. The creature seemed peaceful, but it was still unpredictable. He took a careful step forward, making sure not to startle it. The figure looked up, its eyes locking onto his. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lucas's heart raced, but his curiosity won over his caution. He raised his hand slowly, a universal gesture of peace, and took another step closer. The creature didn't move away. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if studying him. "Hello," Lucas said softly, his voice calm but firm. "I mean no harm." The creature didn't respond with words. Instead, it straightened up and began to circle them, its steps slow and deliberate. Lucas didn't feel threatened, but he remained on guard. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small piece of food, a protein bar he had brought with him. He offered it to the creature, hoping it would recognize the gesture as a sign of goodwill. To his surprise, the creature took a few cautious steps forward, and then sniffed the air. Its long tongue flicked out, tasting the scent of the food. Then, without warning, it grabbed the bar with its sharp, claw-like fingers and began to eat it. Lucas watched in amazement. He had never seen a species like this before, and he had no idea what it might eat or how it would react to him. After finishing the bar, the creature sat down on the ground, its large tail curling around its body. It looked up at him again, its eyes wide and almost curious. Lucas felt a strange pull toward the creature. There was something familiar about its gaze, but he couldn't quite place it. "Are you lost?" he asked gently. The creature didn't respond, but Lucas noticed a strange sadness in its eyes. It seemed to be confused, as if it didn't understand its own existence. He felt a sudden rush of compassion for this alien being. Despite its lizard-like appearance, it didn't seem dangerous. It just seemed alone. Lucas knelt down, keeping his movements slow and steady. He didn't want to frighten it. "You don't have to be alone. I can help you," he said. The creature didn't respond verbally, but it did something unexpected. It reached out and touched Lucas's arm with one of its cold, smooth hands. Lucas felt a jolt of surprise at the contact, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he studied the creature's hand. Its skin was covered in small scales, but the texture felt more like soft leather than anything else. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. "I don't know who you are, but I'll figure it out," Lucas muttered to himself. The creature's eyes seemed to flash with recognition, but the moment passed quickly. It pulled its hand back and stood up, swaying slightly. Lucas followed its movements, trying to understand what it was doing. The creature looked around, then back at him, and for a moment, Lucas thought he saw a hint of distress in its gaze. He took a deep breath and activated the small scanner in his hand, hoping it could give him some answers. As it scanned the creature's body, the device beeped, showing unusual readings. The creature wasn't from this planet. In fact, its genetic makeup didn't match anything Lucas had studied before. But something was off. The creature didn't seem entirely aware of itself. It seemed lost, confused about who it was and where it came from. The jungle was no place for a being like this, and Lucas knew he had to help. "Come with me," Lucas said, standing up. "Let me help you find your way." The creature hesitated, but after a moment, it nodded, as if it understood. Slowly, they began to walk together, the alien steps light but unsure, and Lucas's heart filled with a sense of responsibility. He had discovered something remarkable today, but he also knew that uncovering the truth behind this alien's past would not be easy. Lucas and the strange creature, whom he had started to think of as Zyra, trudged through the thick jungle together. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and the distant chirping of unknown creatures. Zyra moved silently beside him, her sharp eyes constantly scanning the surroundings, while Lucas took occasional glances at his scanner, tracking their route back to the research station. Though the jungle was filled with life, the two of them were an odd pair. One was a scientist, a human who had lived his whole life on Earth, and the other was a mysterious, reptilian alien who seemed more at home in the wild than in a lab. Yet, as they walked, something about their bond began to form, an unspoken connection that made Lucas feel oddly protective of her. Zyra was still silent, her eyes never leaving the path ahead. Lucas had tried speaking with her before, but it was clear that language was a barrier. She didn't seem to understand his words, yet she understood his gestures well enough. She would follow his lead when he pointed in a direction, and she carefully observed his actions, like she was studying him as much as he was studying her. The day passed slowly, and as they reached the edge of the jungle, Lucas finally stopped. The research station lay in the distance, a small prefabricated building surrounded by equipment and other scientific tools. It was home for now, but Lucas knew this was just the beginning of the strange journey ahead. "Let's rest for a while," Lucas said, sitting down on a nearby rock. He took out his water bottle and offered it to Zyra, who hesitated at first, but then took it from his hand. She drank quickly, as though she had not had a drink in a long time. Afterward, she handed it back to him and sat down beside him. Her large tail curled around her legs as she settled, looking up at him with an almost questioning gaze. Lucas knew that something deeper was happening here. Zyra had no idea who she was, or even where she had come from, but there was a strange sense of familiarity in the way she looked at him. It was as if she had known him for much longer than the few hours they had spent together. "I'm going to help you," Lucas said softly, more to himself than to her. He couldn't explain why, but he felt a strong sense of responsibility toward Zyra. She was lost, confused, and far from home, and he was the one who had found her. It was his duty now to help her remember her past. Zyra looked at him for a long moment before slowly nodding. Her expression was unreadable, but Lucas saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Trust, desperation. He couldn't tell, but he was determined to find out. That night, as they sat around a small fire just outside the station, Lucas tried something different. He pulled out his tablet and began to show Zyra images of various human cultures, hoping to spark something in her memory. He started with images of Earth, pictures of cities, oceans, mountains, and animals. Zyra watched closely, her eyes following the images on the screen with curiosity. As he flicked through the pictures, he saw her body tense slightly when he showed an image of a human family. She tilted her head, almost as if the image was familiar. Lucas paused the slideshow and turned the screen toward her. "Do you recognize any of this?" he asked, his voice gentle. "This is Earth. These are people, humans." Zyra stared at the image for a long time, her expression shifting. Lucas thought for a moment that she might speak, but instead, she reached out and touched the screen with one clawed finger. It was a simple gesture, but there was something meaningful about it. She didn't seem frightened or confused anymore. She was focused, concentrated. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something about her gaze, something in the way she was studying the images that told him she knew more than she let on. He could see it in her eyes. She recognized something, but she couldn't yet bring it to the surface. "I know this is hard for you," Lucas said softly, setting the tablet down beside him. "But we can figure it out. Together." Zara's gaze shifted from the tablet to Lucas, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. There was a strange understanding between them now, something that went beyond language. Lucas couldn't explain it, but he felt as though he had just made a breakthrough, even if it was small. The fire crackled softly between them, the only sound breaking the silence. Zara's tail flicked slightly, and Lucas leaned back, staring up at the stars. He was so used to looking at the stars alone, but now he wasn't. With Zara beside him, it felt like the universe had expanded in some way, as if the answers to all of life's mysteries were just beyond their reach. As they sat there, the air between them calm and still, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that Zara was close to remembering something important. It was like a puzzle with one piece still missing, and Lucas was determined to help her find it. He couldn't explain it yet, but there was something about Zara's presence that felt like fate. The adventure ahead of them was just beginning, and no matter where it led, Lucas was ready to see it through. The days passed slowly, but Lucas's sense of purpose grew with each one. He had built a small workstation in the research station, where he could study Zara more closely. She wasn't like the creatures he had encountered before. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and curious, traits that made Lucas even more determined to help her uncover the truth. Zara had grown more comfortable with her surroundings. She spent most of her time studying the various human objects Lucas had shown her, although many of them were still unfamiliar. Yet there were moments when her gaze would linger on an image or an object, as if something deep inside her was trying to wake up. One evening, after another long day of exploring the planet's strange flora, Lucas sat across from Zara at the small table in the station. He was focused on a data tablet, analyzing the results from the latest scan of her biology. The scans had confirmed something that Lucas had suspected for days. Zara was not just an alien species from this planet, but something else entirely. Her DNA was a strange blend of human and alien genetics, unlike anything Lucas had ever seen before. Her heart raced with each scan, her neural patterns were sophisticated, and her body seemed to be the product of advanced biotechnology. Something wasn't adding up. How could this be possible? And why did Zara not recognize herself? "Zara," Lucas spoke gently, lowering the tablet and looking directly at her. She was sitting quietly, her long tail curled around her legs. Her eyes were fixed on him, but there was still an air of uncertainty about her. "I've been looking at your scans. You're not like anything I've ever seen before." Zara tilted her head slightly. It was as if she was trying to understand his words. Lucas hesitated but continued. "You're not from here. Your biology doesn't match anything from this planet. You're different." Zara's gaze flickered for a moment. Lucas could see the hint of something in her eyes, something close to fear. She wasn't ready for this conversation, but Lucas knew it was time. She needed to understand who she really was. "I think there's more to you than just this." Lucas gestured to her reptilian appearance. "You've been changed. This body, this form, it's not permanent. It's part of something bigger." Zara stiffened at his words. She didn't understand, but Lucas could tell she was processing it. Her mind was racing, just as his own had when he first saw the results. He could sense that Zara was holding onto something that made her afraid to fully embrace the truth. Lucas reached for a small device on the table and turned it on. It was a neural stimulator, a tool that could help with memory recall. He had used it in his research before to help study alien brain patterns, but this time he hoped it could help Zara unlock her past. "I want to help you remember," Lucas said softly, his voice full of empathy. "I know it's hard, but you're not just this creature. You're more than that. You've forgotten, but I can help you." Zara stared at the stimulator, her expression unreadable. She seemed to understand what he was offering, but there was a hesitation in her eyes. Lucas didn't push her. He knew that memories, especially forgotten ones, could be overwhelming. But she needed to know who she was. After a long moment, Zara finally nodded. She lowered her head slightly, as though preparing herself. Lucas activated the device, and a soft hum filled the air. The stimulator began to emit a gentle pulse, aimed at stimulating neural pathways in Zara's brain. Lucas watched closely, his heart pounding. At first, nothing happened. Zara sat perfectly still, her tail twitching slightly. But then her eyes widened, and a sudden sharp breath escaped her lips. It was subtle, but it was enough to tell Lucas that something was happening. Zara's body tensed, and for a moment, Lucas was afraid he had gone too far. But then, slowly, she began to move. Her fingers twitched, and she reached out, grasping the edge of the table with one clawed hand. Her eyes glazed over as memories flooded back to her. There were flashes, disjointed images of stars, vast ships soaring through the black void, and faces. Alien faces, human faces, and her own. The images blurred together, and Zara gasped, her hand flying to her head, as if trying to stop the rush of memories. Lucas stood up, his heart racing. "Zara?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She didn't respond at first. Her breathing was quick and shallow as the memories continued to overwhelm her. Lucas moved closer, not sure whether he should stop the stimulation or let it continue. Suddenly, Zara's eyes snapped open, and she looked directly at him. There was a change in her expression, a shift. For the first time since Lucas had found her, she seemed more aware, more like herself. I remember," Zara whispered, her voice shaky, but full of wonder. I was not always like this. I was something else." Lucas's heart swelled with hope. "What do you remember?" Zara closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to piece the fragments of her past together. "I was a scientist. I worked on a ship that crashed." The words hit Lucas like a wave. He knew it. He had suspected as much. But hearing her speak it out loud felt like an answer. Zara wasn't from this planet. She was from somewhere far away, far beyond the stars. "We'll figure it out," Lucas said, a sense of determination in his voice. Together. Zara's eyes were wide with confusion and wonder, the pieces of her past coming together in fragments. She sat on the edge of the table, her body still trembling slightly from the rush of memories. Lucas stood before her, waiting for her to process the flood of information. Her mind was catching up to the reality of who she had been, and Lucas could only watch as she slowly tried to piece it all together. "I was a scientist," Zara repeated, her voice quiet, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "I worked on a ship. I was part of a mission. But then, something went wrong." Lucas's heart raced. This was more than he had hoped for. She wasn't just an alien life form. She had been part of something much larger. "What happened to the ship?" he asked gently, taking a step closer. Zara's eyes grew distant, as though trying to pull more details from the depths of her mind. "We were exploring, searching for new worlds. But there was a storm, a cosmic storm. It hit us, and the ship, it crashed." Lucas's pulse quickened as he listened. A ship, a crash. This was exactly what he had suspected. Zara was no ordinary alien. She had been part of an advanced mission, one that had gone terribly wrong. "Where did the ship crash?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. He needed to know everything. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, her mind struggling to recall the details. Then, in a soft whisper, she said, "On a planet. A world like this one, but different. I was changed." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at her own hands. "I was changed into this." Lucas's heart sank. The pieces were falling into place, but it didn't explain everything. She had been altered, perhaps even experimented on, since the crash. But who had done it? And why? Zira. Lucas said carefully, "You said you were changed. What do you mean by that? What happened to you?" Zira shuddered, the memories unsettling her. I remember being human, but I was also something else. They took me. I think they thought I was a threat. They did something to me, something to my body. I don't know what they did, but when I woke up, I was different. I wasn't human anymore. Lucas moved around the table to stand beside her. Who did this to you, Zira? Who took you and changed you? Zira's eyes flashed with fear. I don't know. I remember their faces, but it's all blurry. They were not from the ship, not from my team. They were others. They wanted something from me, something I didn't understand. Lucas took a deep breath, trying to keep his own emotions in check. This wasn't just about helping Zira. It was about uncovering a dangerous mystery. There were people, others who had done this to her, people who had altered her very being. You're not alone anymore, Lucas said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll find out who did this to you. I promise. Zira turned her head to look at him, her eyes filled with both gratitude and uncertainty. But I don't know if I can go back to what I was. I don't know if I can ever be human again. Lucas shook his head. It's not about being human. It's about who you are now. You're still you, Zira, no matter what's been done to you. Zira's eyes softened at his words, and for the first time since they had met, Lucas saw a flicker of hope in her gaze. She wasn't just a lost soul anymore. She was beginning to find herself again. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Lucas smiled gently. No need to thank me. I'm not going anywhere. We'll get through this together. Zira nodded slowly, her tail curling around her feet. As the silence stretched between them, Lucas thought about what they would do next. They couldn't stay here forever. The research station was safe for now, but the truth was out there, somewhere. They had to find the answers. Who were the ones responsible for Zira's transformation? And why had they chosen her? There was still so much to uncover, but Lucas was determined. He had already started a path with Zira by his side, and he wasn't about to stop now. Together, they would search for the truth, piece by piece. After a long pause, Zira stood up from the table, her posture more confident than before. I want to remember more. I want to know what happened to the others, to my crew. Lucas nodded, his mind already working on their next step. We'll figure it out. I'll help you, Zira. We'll get your memories back, one way or another. Zira's eyes glowed with a mixture of determination and fear, but beneath it, there was something else. Hope. The same hope that had begun to form between them since the moment they had met. They weren't just two strangers on a distant planet anymore. They were allies, united in a quest for answers. Lucas took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. They had much to uncover, but he knew one thing for certain. No matter where the truth led them, they would face it together. The next few days were filled with determination. Lucas and Zira worked together, studying the crash site and the surrounding area. Zira's memories were slowly coming back, but they were still fragmented. She would remember pieces of her past in flashes, brief images of her crew, the ship, and the world they had crashed on. But the full picture was still unclear. They needed more answers, and Lucas wasn't going to stop until they found them. Zira was beginning to feel stronger. She no longer flinched at every loud sound or sudden movement. Though her transformation was still a mystery, she was becoming more comfortable in her new form. Her sharp senses allowed her to navigate the wilderness with ease, and her alien strength helped her carry out tasks that would have been difficult for any ordinary human. Still, Lucas could see that she was struggling with her past. There was a sadness in her eyes, a longing for something she could not fully remember. But Lucas wasn't about to let her face it alone. He was with her every step of the way. One morning, they stood together at the edge of the crash site. The wreckage of the ship was still visible in the distance, partially buried under vines and overgrowth. The jungle had claimed the site in the years since the crash, but there were still signs of the ship's landing. The metal was charred, and parts of the ship's hull had been torn open, as though something or someone had searched the wreckage. "We need to find more," Lucas said, glancing at Zara. "There's got to be something here that can tell us who did this to you." Zara nodded, her eyes scanning the area. "I remember. Fragments. I think I know where the others were. Some of them didn't survive." Lucas felt a chill run through him. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Zara, alone, surrounded by wreckage, and unsure of what had happened to her. "Let's go," he said, his voice firm. "We'll start there." They made their way toward the wreckage, moving carefully through the jungle. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and leaves, and the sound of distant animals echoed around them. Zara led the way, her keen senses guiding them. Every now and then, she would stop, her tail twitching as she listened for something just out of reach. As they neared the wreck, Lucas could see that it was far worse than he had imagined. The ship had broken apart on impact, and there were signs of a struggle. He could see scorch marks on the ground, as though something had been dragged across the surface. There were also strange footprints, alien in nature, that led away from the wreckage. This wasn't just an accident, Lucas muttered to himself. Someone or something was here after the crash. Zara crouched beside the wreckage, her sharp eyes scanning the ground. She reached down and picked up a piece of twisted metal, her fingers brushing against something hidden beneath it. With a gentle tug, she pulled out what looked like a small metallic device, a data chip. "Is this?" Lucas began, his voice trailing off as Zara handed it to him. He turned it over in his hands. The device was small and smooth, but there were markings on it, alien symbols he didn't recognize. "This could be what we need." Zara's eyes darkened as she watched Lucas closely. This was in the ship, before everything happened. Lucas looked at her, his heart pounding. "Do you think this could have something to do with what happened to you?" Zara nodded slowly. "It could, but I'm afraid of what it might reveal." "I understand," Lucas said, his voice reassuring. "But we can't stop now. We need to know the truth." He connected the chip to his tablet, hoping it would provide some answers. The screen flickered as the device came to life, displaying a series of encrypted files. Lucas frowned as he tried to access them. The encryption was advanced, likely far beyond anything he had worked with before. But Lucas was resourceful. He wasn't going to let a little encryption stop him. He worked quickly, using his skills to break through the code. After a few tense minutes, the screen finally revealed a set of coordinates, along with a short message. Subject Alpha, do not engage. Termination protocol active. Extraction in progress. The words sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. Subject Alpha, Zara. They had been experimenting on her. The message was clear. She was considered a threat. The termination protocol sounded like a plan to get rid of her. Zara took a step back, her eyes wide. I remember now. I wasn't just part of the mission. I was something else. They wanted to use me." Lucas clenched his fists. "They experimented on you, Zara. They turned you into something you weren't. And now, they're trying to cover their tracks." Zara's eyes glowed with a mixture of anger and fear. "I don't know who they are, but they won't get away with it." Lucas placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find them. We'll make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Zara's expression softened as she looked at him. "Thank you, Lucas, for helping me remember, for not giving up." Lucas smiled. "We're in this together, and we're not stopping until we find the truth." Together, they set off in search of the coordinates, determined to uncover the secrets that had been hidden for so long. They weren't just hunting for answers, they were hunting for justice. The journey was long, and the terrain grew more challenging as they followed the coordinates from the data chip. Lucas and Zara moved through thick forests and steep hills, the air growing warmer as they traveled deeper into the heart of the planet. Despite the difficulties, they pushed forward, driven by the need to uncover the truth. Zira was quiet for most of the journey. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of what the message on the chip had revealed. She was Subject Alpha. The realization haunted her. She had always known something was wrong with her, but now she understood. The people who had altered her, who had changed her into something she wasn't, had labeled her as a subject, a project. Lucas could see the weight of the discovery on her face. She had come so far already, and now the truth was in her hands. She had been experimented on, transformed into something unrecognizable, but she wasn't ready to accept that part of her past. Not yet. "We're getting close," Lucas said, breaking the silence as he scanned the landscape. His eyes landed on a small ridge in the distance, the trees parting slightly to reveal a clearing. "It should be just beyond that hill." Zira nodded, though she was still lost in her thoughts. She didn't respond immediately, but Lucas could feel the tension in her. He knew that this next part would be the hardest. They were close to the answers, but with those answers came new questions and new dangers. As they climbed the final hill, the forest began to thin, and a strange, almost eerie silence settled over them. The air felt heavy, as though something was watching them, waiting. Lucas reached for the small blaster he had kept by his side for protection, though he hoped they wouldn't need to use it. They reached the top of the hill, and what they saw made their hearts race. Below them, hidden in a deep valley, was a large metal structure, an underground facility, barely visible under the thick foliage that surrounded it. The building was old, its surfaces rusted and weathered, but it was unmistakably a place where experiments had been conducted. There were no signs of life, no guards or patrols. The place was abandoned, but it wasn't empty. Lucas could feel that there was something inside, something they needed to uncover. Zira stepped forward, her senses on high alert. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "This is where they took me, where they did those things to me." Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the facility. He wasn't sure what they would find inside, but he was certain that this place held the answers they had been searching for. "Let's move carefully," he said. "We don't know what's in there, but we're not leaving without the truth." They carefully made their way down the slope toward the entrance. The facility was surrounded by thick vines and vegetation, but there was a clear path that led to a rusted door. Lucas pushed it open slowly, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing in the quiet. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the dim light from outside barely lit the room. It smelled of decay and old technology. There were rows of machinery, some broken, some still running with a low hum. The walls were lined with strange symbols, alien writing, similar to what Lucas had seen on the data chip. He couldn't understand them, but it was clear that this was a place of great significance. Zira's eyes darted around, her body tense as she took in her surroundings. "I remember this place," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This was where they kept me, where they changed me." Lucas could see the pain in her eyes, but there was something else too. Determination. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was here to find answers. They moved deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing through the halls. The further they went, the more the strange alien symbols appeared. It was as though the facility had been built specifically for whatever experiments had been conducted here. There were rooms filled with technology that Lucas didn't recognize, machines that looked like they had been used for genetic testing or biological modification. At the end of a long hallway, they came to a large door. It was different from the others. It looked newer, and the symbols on it were more intricate. Lucas could feel a pull toward it, as if this was the place they had been searching for. This door held the final answers. He glanced at Zira, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. Zira nodded, though her eyes betrayed her nerves. "I have to know," she said. "I have to know what they did to me." Lucas carefully placed his hand on the door's control panel and activated it. The door slid open with a low hiss, revealing a large, circular chamber inside. At the center of the room was a raised platform, surrounded by strange equipment. The air in the room felt different, charged with energy, as though it had been untouched for years. Zira stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room. And then she froze. There, on the platform, was a figure. It was humanoid, but it was unlike anything Lucas had ever seen. Its skin was pale and smooth, its eyes large and unblinking. It looked unfinished, as though it had been created but never fully realized. "This is it," Zira whispered, her voice trembling. "This is what they were trying to make. This is what they wanted me to become." The truth was now clear. The experiments had been far more sinister than either of them had imagined. They weren't just altering bodies, they were creating something entirely new. But Zira wasn't going to let them succeed. Not now. Not ever. Zira stared at the figure on the platform, her breath catching in her throat. The creature in front of them was a twisted version of herself. It was humanoid, with a smooth, pale skin that shimmered under the dim light. Its large, dark eyes seemed to stare straight through her, unblinking, lifeless. This was the end result of the experiments, the thing they had been trying to make her into. The realization hit Zira like a wave. The scientists had not just changed her, they had tried to create something completely new, an entirely different being. The truth was more horrifying than she had imagined. This is what they wanted me to become," Zira whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Lucas stepped forward, his expression hardening as he looked at the figure. They were trying to make something inhuman. A weapon, maybe. Something to control. Zira felt a knot tighten in her chest. The creature before her was the result of a life that had been twisted, a life that had been altered against its will. She had spent so many years questioning who she was, wondering what had happened to her. But now, standing in this room, she knew the truth. She wasn't just a victim of a crash. She was a victim of a far greater crime. Why? Why didn't they just leave us alone? She muttered, her tail twitching in frustration. Lucas turned to her, his eyes softening. "They saw you as an experiment, Zira. They saw you as something to control. But you're not just that. You're so much more." Zira's gaze flickered to the figure on the platform, the empty shell that had been left behind in their failed experiment. The thought of herself becoming something like that made her feel sick. But she wasn't that thing. She wasn't a weapon. She wasn't a subject. "You're right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm not that. I'm me." Lucas nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Exactly. And you're going to make sure no one else goes through what you did." Zira took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as she steeled herself. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wouldn't let this place, or the people who had done this to her, win. She turned toward the platform, her eyes narrowing. The machine around her seemed to hum softly, like it was waiting for something. Zira didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but there had to be something here, some clue about who had conducted these experiments, and why they had done it. Lucas joined her, scanning the walls of the chamber for any signs of activity. The room was cold and sterile, filled with strange technology that looked outdated but still dangerous. "We need to find more answers. There has to be a way to stop them from doing this to anyone else." Zira nodded, her heart racing. "I won't let them do it again." They moved around the chamber, searching for anything that could help them understand who had been behind the experiments. After several minutes of searching, Lucas found a hidden compartment in the wall. He carefully opened it, revealing a control panel filled with more of the strange symbols they had seen earlier. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed a button. The screen flickered to life, and a series of encrypted files appeared. Lucas's fingers flew over the panel as he worked to decode the information. His brow furrowed as he read the lines of data, trying to make sense of it all. They were working for someone, Lucas said, his voice low. There's a higher authority behind this, someone who ordered the experiments. But the names, they're all coded. Zira frowned. Do you think they're still out there? Still planning more experiments? Lucas looked at her, determination in his eyes. I don't know, but we won't stop until we find out. He quickly copied the files to his tablet, hoping to decode them later. But just as he finished, a loud sound echoed through the facility, a deep mechanical hum, followed by a soft tremor beneath their feet. What's happening? Zyra asked, her eyes wide. Lucas grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the door. We need to get out of here. Whatever they were doing, it's about to get worse. As they rushed toward the exit, the ground beneath them shook again. The walls of the facility began to crack, dust falling from the ceiling. It was clear that the facility had been abandoned for years, but now something inside it was coming to life again. They reached the entrance, but just as they were about to step outside, a loud crash rang out from behind them. The door to the chamber slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire building. A soft, mechanical voice echoed from the speakers above them. System failure. Protocols activated. Facility lockdown in progress. Zyra's heart pounded in her chest. What does that mean? What's happening? It means we need to get out of here now. Lucas shouted. They turned and ran, the building shaking around them. The air was thick with dust and the sound of collapsing metal. Zyra's senses were on high alert, every step taking her closer to safety. But she could feel the weight of the truth settling over her. They had uncovered part of the mystery, but there was so much more left to discover. And no matter what happened, she wouldn't stop until she had all the answers.